Hey everyone, welcome to How to Pitch an Investor, sponsored by New York Tech Media. Today I'm with Daniel Karp from Cervin, wonderful investor that has been in Cisco prior to this role. Daniel, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about your experience, how you got to Cervin, and what was in your previous background?
Absolutely. So I've been with Cervin for about 4.5 months now. And prior to Cervin, I was, as you said, I was at Cisco for about 8.5 years. I've done a bunch of roles at Cisco, but all of those were in the investments and M&A team. So started off as like the Israel lead, as a geo lead for Cisco investments and M&A. After 3 years, I started to cover Latin America as well. And about 5.5 years into the role, I moved back to the U.S. because I was located in Israel before, and I started covering domains, which pretty much are a proxy for BUs that Cisco business units that Cisco has. So I was in charge initially of the inorganic work related to the data centers domain, and then data centers and cloud, and eventually they got me and I started to cover networking. And so all in all, 3 multi-billion-dollar BUs that I was covering. And prior to that, I was at Microsoft in the Azure team doing BD and product and strategy. Previously, I was a VC in an Israeli fund called Amiti. And before that, I was a chip design engineer and team lead. Probably was mediocre at that, but I did capture some of the elements of that work, and I try to implement that in some of the ideas that I have today. And I'm an 8200 grad, like pretty much every Israeli that you meet, and that's pretty much like the history there.
So when you were an engineer, and at that time, do you remember like wanting to be an investor, wanting to get into VC?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't think I was as sophisticated as an engineer. I think that what I knew is that I really liked the technology piece of it, but I didn't know if I wanted to continue on the R&D route. I've looked at like the VP R&D of like the company that I was in back in the days, and I just figured like they're super smart, super passionate about what they do, and I always felt like, yeah, tech is like where I want to be. That's like the segment of the market that I want to cover. I just didn't want to write code, and I didn't want to, just like, go and like, make sure that I manage like Gantt charts. And so I just like, pulled a Band-Aid off like really quickly and did like an MBA in Chicago. And I kind of like, once I was there, I just figured out like there's so much like to the tech world. And one of the interesting things about like the University of Chicago is that you actually can do an internship in funds there as part of like the program. It's actually a course. And that's what I kind of like try to do in like year one, even though like for the most part, like second years, go and do that. But I just figured out like, this is such an interesting, like this, I have a safe environment for the next like 1.5 years or so to just like go and explore and learn as much about like different segments in tech as possible. The fastest way to do it is like, via VC. And so I've done that in year 2, eventually in Amity, but that's kind of like, where my passion, like, as it relates to just the VC industry started. And, when I moved to Microsoft and I did a summer internship at Microsoft and got an offer to get back. When I moved back to Microsoft post-graduation, I did this rotational program, and I was kind of like trying to emulate like the work that I've done as a VC and all of these roles that I had, all these projects that I've had, which kind of got me going. Like, this is like what I want to do. So why spend time on a specific sort of, part of, of the company rather than just like, try to be as like, as broad as possible. So yeah, that's what got me going. Like, you know, that early sort of engagement and experience, like in Amity. And interestingly enough, what I've done at Microsoft is you know, at some point I just started to lead strategy for incubation projects, which gave me everything but the investment piece. And then, you know, I just figured I do need that kind of like, you know, that sensation, that need to, you know, go and work with like real investments. And so that's what got me to Cisco. And you know, I coupled that with M&A as well. So there's a transactional piece as well of like, you know, how you can impact the company, but also like the strategic investment angle like kept me going and helped me continue to, you know, work and hone my skills in sort of, you know, in the VC ecosystem and in the VC community. So I guess that like engineering, to answer your question, engineering is sort of, you know, a foundational building block that I use. I did not know that I wanted to be a VC, but once you know, I knew that I wanted to like just like have a taste of multiple segments of like the technology like space, then I knew like VC is probably the quickest and dirtiest sort of, you know, apprenticeship like process that you can go through.
Love it. Love it. So I want to kind of lean in and kind of ask you more of like, you know, the nitty gritty stuff relating to investing. So I think like my first question will be like, basically, how do you prefer to get contacted by an entrepreneur? Do you prefer to be contacted, you know, via email, via warm intro, maybe a LinkedIn direct message? What's your preferred way to
Yeah.
do that?
I mean, the best response, like you'll get the best response if you do it through somebody that I know. It's just like you just put a weight right on you know the clout of that person. So that always is like the best way. And it doesn't really matter if it's like, you know, hey, you know, I reached out to LinkedIn because like person X like said that, you know, that we should talk to you, or like via email or like, you know, per se introduction from that person. So that works best, but like there's so many routes like to get to me today, anywhere from like email, which is sort of, you know, probably like the longest response time, through like, you know, LinkedIn, you know, social media and such. That's you know, a little bit more immediate. But I think like what we strive to do is to make sure that like, you know, if it is interesting, like we'll get back to you like rather quickly, as long as like we're, you know, we're online. And if it isn't, like, you know, you'll probably know quite rapidly. The one thing that I would say is that before you go and reach out, like the interesting thing to do is to learn a little bit about the fund and sort of our characteristics, right? If you reach out to us and you're raising like your E round, like we're not going to participate. It's just not what we do. If you'll do consumer, it's not what we do, right? So if you can get you can go like online, look at our website, look at our like, you know, our LinkedIn profiles, like see what type of big deals we've done. That helps a lot.
And what is the first thing you notice about an entrepreneur? You know, once you do a Zoom with him, once you kind of do a face-to-face meeting with him or her.
Yeah. So I think the first thing that we try to look for is, you know, passion and domain expertise related to, you know, the problem that she or he are trying to solve. The second one is like we would look for grit. Like we have entrepreneurs that we've been backing, you know, since, you know, 10 years ago, right? So, you know, Fund 2 company, like, you know, Paystan has been around for 10 years, and it's a long journey. So you got to have stamina. You have to have like, you know, grit and sort of, resourcefulness, resilience. It's hard to pick up like in the first meeting, but like in every meeting that we have, we will look for that, right? And then like, you know, just we really notice like entrepreneurs that know and appreciate their competition. Like that's a question that I will always have. And every time that we have an entrepreneur that downplays, that just, it's not a good look. So like, know your competition, appreciating competition, appreciating, like, you're appreciating sort of the vantage point and sort of the architectural decision that you've made in order to differentiate. That's something that we care about.
Interesting. And do you think that does it matter if the entrepreneur is a first time founder or someone who has more experience?
I mean, in the back of the head, it matters. Like, the best entrepreneurs that I've seen are either, repeat entrepreneurs that have not had a meaningful outcome. So, it's like an okayish outcome, like, that's typically, like, pretty good sort of, sign that, like, there's stamina in place, like there's a chip on the shoulder, something like else to prove, right? So those are like really good sort of, entrepreneurs for us. But, first time entrepreneurs, like, we also like that pretty much. As long as there's sort of, like, direct experience in that particular field, or like they're trying to solve for a problem that they've experienced in sort of, their previous roles. Like, first time entrepreneurs, we handle really well. I think the biggest, like, question around, so like, like, repeat entrepreneurs that have been there, like, 4 or 5 times is like, is the stamina there? To, what kind of deal are they looking for? Like, repeat entrepreneurs are smart, right? They will look for a certain deal, and we may not be able to, accommodate for that deal. So, we would not invest 50 million in a company. And some repeat entrepreneurs, can actually command that, right? If you think about like a DevRel, right? They got 50 million, just because, they were successful in the past, right? And that makes sense. So, there's a certain cohort of, like, repeat entrepreneurs that are looking for certain terms that we just cannot accommodate for.
So, previously in the conversation, you kind of stated that, you went into VC because you wanted to kind of interact with a wider nest of verticals in tech. With that being said, is there any specific vertical or sector that interests you personally more than others?
Yeah, so I spend I spend all of my time right now on infrastructure and dev tools. So infrastructure is a pretty broad characterization, but to us, it basically means, like, cloud management, orchestration, DevOps, operations, infrastructure operations, so ITOps, things like security, and, from a dev tools perspective, like, automation, anything related to sort of, increasing the ROI and reducing, like, the dependency on DevOps by the dev community. But the one thing that kind of ties everything together is that I believe that, there's a set of motions that I focus on, which is very much in line with what I wanted to do more of at Cisco. And I believe that the next set of, like, enterprises, big infrastructure enterprise solutions and DevOps solutions will be sort of, either open source first or PLG first. And so I spent a lot of cycles on just understanding the motion. To me, that is as important today as the technology piece. So you got to have, like, the right set of architectures and tech, but you have to just execute the life out of, like, the motions, and the next set of, like, large enterprise companies out there are probably going to be open source first.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a bit of an overview question. It will sound a bit, generalist here, but I think it's something that I've seen, a lot of people talk about, especially a lot of young entrepreneurs kind of talking about in between circles and not kind of going outside and kind of publicizing their thoughts on it. While my readers and viewers know that I've kind of talked about it in a few of my written publications. We feel like there is some sort of bubble in the tech industry. Well, I don't know if it's like the .com bubble, probably not, but we do feel like there is some sort of a bubble, and we're seeing so many of the startups that got, heavily funded, continuing to be unprofitable. And quite a lot, in quite a period of time, compared to what, we remember startups were, 10, 15 years ago. And I'm not even talking about, WeWork or other kind of, more gigantic and, really press oriented kind of companies. But we are seeing, companies that are taking a long time to be profitable. While there's a trend of a lot of really niche bootstrap SaaS companies who their founders are getting cashed in every single month, and they get to obviously own the whole company without, So what is your personal thoughts about it? And obviously you're going to be a bit biased because you're a VC, but what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. So, the bootstrapping, so, the spend question. So, like the first thing that I'll tell you is, like, my caveat is, like, none of us can predict the future, right? There's a little bit of, like, there's obviously, there are a lot of, like, non-trivial negative signs in the market. I think that's kind of a given. What will eventually happen, it's kind of hard to predict, because, like, there's sort of an artificial inflation, like, in the market that started, like, when, like, all the COVID grants, like, started, and so, like, what the Fed did there. But it's interesting. I think that, like, there's a lot more focus, like, at least in the last few months, at least here in the Valley, and I'm assuming that, like, it's trickling down to Israel as well, because I've been starting to hear about that, of, like, a little bit more of a concern, a little bit more of, like, a cautious approach to spend. I think, like, if an entrepreneur can bootstrap the company, that's phenomenal. It really depends on the cases. It's on a case by case basis. If you've got, there are examples of companies that have not taken out external capital and were successful in, like, just driving growth, and then pressing hard on on growth matrix by, like taking what is an equivalent of a Series C, right? $100 million raise at, like, a high valuation, in order just, like, just pour more gasoline, right, and grow faster. I think the way to think about it is, like, you have to have an honest, unbiased conversation amongst the management team, the entrepreneurs, over whether you can bootstrap the company, and what you can actually fathom, what you can actually, like, take on, right? If you have a way to, like, live and, like, just, like, not overspend and not extend yourself, like, as an entrepreneur, and try to, like, to brace yourself and keep it tight as much as possible before, like, you go and raise, that's great, because you, like, you have effectively a larger ownership of the company. The flip side of that is whether you can actually do that, right? Money solves for a lot of problems. Sometimes, your company is capped. I was just having this conversation earlier this morning with an entrepreneur that has bootstrapped the company, and now he's seeing, like, contracts of 500K to 1 million, like, literally, like, took no money. He's a repeat entrepreneur, so he gets to do that, but now he needs to hire a team, right? So how do you actually, like, support, like, $1 million, customer, like, with a certain SLA expectation, right? So I think that, like, you just have to be very, very frank with your ability to grow. If you think that you're capped, take the money. Like, dilution is, it's a tough pill to swallow, but, like, it will help, right? That money will help solve some of the problems, some of the scaling problems that you can encounter and you will encounter as an entrepreneur. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, it does, but I have a follow-up question. So as an early stage investor, when you start investing, obviously you guys are usually, if I'm not mistaken, the first VC to kind of back a company. when will you, like, in terms of benchmarking, when are you looking for the company to become profitable, you know, in a span of years? Obviously, it's a general question and every company is different, but if you really got to narrow it down into like a benchmark framework, what would you have to say?
Yeah, so it's a little bit tough to talk about like profitability because it really depends on sort of, the growth, like the potential of the company, right? I think the more important sort of, question is whether, there's an ROI on the investment. Like, if you're gonna go and like, pour in, $1 and get $2 out of that, that's, that leads you, to a trajectory of profitability over time. But you gotta invest like at the beginning, right? In the sales, sales organization, in the marketing organization, and you have to have like the adequate like engineering like capacity in order to support that growth. I think that a good way to think about it is whether like you can strive for profitability and what would be the impact of a downturn on your company and whether you can actually go and respond to that quickly. So what I mean by that is like, you don't necessarily have to strive for profitability, as you try to scale the company. But if a downturn takes place, or what will you do need to have a plan in place for a downturn. So as an example, like, if your company has, 300, 400, 1,000 employees, will you, if things are tight, and you need to crunch things, will you still be able to continue to grow, and cross that chasm of profitability, if there's a downturn in place, and what is the price that you need to pay, right? You'll have to lay off some people. Is that like 5% of the company? Is that 10% of the company? But you always have to, like, you don't have to go and execute on that, but you just have to you just need to have that plan in place, right? But like just having a really good like handle on, how you spend and, what does that translate into, that makes a ton of sense. And for very, very early stage companies, which is the companies that we start, working with, you do have to invest because you've got like nothing. You will not sell until you have a product market fit, and you will wander, right, until you have that product market fit, because repeatability is something that's really hard to just, to define. So you still have to experiment, like for our companies, and we don't expect our companies to be profitable, like, in the rounds that we invest in, and like in the follow-on rounds, pretty much like the A's, B's, they're not going to be profitable. But we do expect our entrepreneurs to be disciplined and to measure, the ROI on where they're spending their dollars.
If as an investor, there is stress, right? There's stress, you have LPs, you have people that you gotta return the investment for. How do you manage that stress on a personal level?
Swimming.
Okay.
Yeah. No, but look, I think like the way that I typically think about things is through the inbox test, which is, my inbox may be stressful, but I can tell you that I would never replace my inbox with those of the entrepreneurs that I back. Like they do, like they have like, they're just, building a real business, and we're building our own sort of, business, our platform, right? But to be quite honest, like I think that the like empathy for others, making sure that like you have sort of, some sort of like, a happy place that you go to. I think all of that helps. And I don't think like this job is as stressful as, some of the other jobs that are out there, like being a policeman, right? So,
Yeah.
so I think like it's all like, it's all relative.
I
And
love
to
it.
be quite honest, I think it's just like, I don't spend a lot of cycles on being stressed out, because like there's just so much to achieve and so much to do. And I'm super lucky of being able to just go and learn more about like technologies, meet with, passionate and talented entrepreneurs. It's not easy to say no, but to companies, but that's also something that you need to sort of, master. And regardless, I think like having empathy and trying to help entrepreneurs that you back, that you don't back, is just, I think that's a privilege. So again, I think those are my happy thoughts about that.
Love it. Love it. Perspective is definitely a strong key here. I have 2 or 3 last questions, and I'm going to make them quick. I know you're busy. Productivity wise, is there any quick productivity tips that help you throughout your day?
Productivity, yeah, I mean, like things that can help. You have to think about what you want to accomplish like on a daily basis. Every day when I wake up, I try to figure out what I want to accomplish like on that particular day. There are a lot of like tools that help in terms of just offloading things. So I mean, we like Calendly, Slack, like just direct communication, just trying to not to overthink responses. That helps. Like being at Cisco, where you have to think about every email, like that also helps, being a little bit more fine-tuned and decisive in what you say in every email. So I think not leaving things like not just like yeah, I think the most important thing like that you do is you have to set up a goal for the day of what you want to do, and then a goal for what you want to achieve like for the week, and then work that out. And then if you achieved like the 3 things that you wanted to accomplish that day, great. If not, pass them on to the next day and like think through them again and think whether they're important enough. If you haven't done them yesterday, maybe they're not as important.
Love it.
So just try to be very unbiased, and just intrinsically think about what you do need to do and try to achieve those things.
Do you work from a to-do list, or do you just go through your work through your calendar? Do you have an actual app or something that you use for a to-do list, or?
Yeah, so I'm notoriously bad with productivity apps, but I typically take notes, and I typically look at the calendar, and then if there's if there's a certain set of goals that I'm working towards that are not on a daily basis, then I just allocate enough time in the schedule. I just block things in my schedule so that I can just focus on those.
Love it. And my last question for you today is if there is any VC, if there is any individual investor or book or movie that has kind of impacted your mindset and the way you invest.
Yeah, I think probably one of the better books is and it's been overly abused, but The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Ben Horowitz, yeah, everyone says that. Everyone literally says that book, yeah. You're not the first one.
The interesting thing about it is you can just envision yourself in those situations, and so I think that's that's phenomenal. It's just seeing the ups and downs of a company and some of the more stressful periods of the tech industry. That's a big one. Look, I try to learn from my peers quite a bit. I think there's a lot of really good VCs out there. They're not necessarily those that are very famous, but there's a lot of funds that I work with and that I try to learn from. I'll give a shout out to Amity, my mentor in this industry, and the guy that that gave me the first opportunity is Ben Rabinowitz from Amity. So I've learned a lot from him, and I've learned a lot from folks that that have managed me, that have been my peers. People like Yoav Samed that hired me at Cisco and was in stage one. The good news is like the industry just like gives you an opportunity to learn from very accomplished people. You see some interesting like dynamics as well, but you learn from very accomplished and smart people. I have a friend who's typically like the smartest guy in the room. I learn a lot from that person, right? And the interesting thing about it is that like you don't necessarily have to be the most vocal or the most like the most out there in order to to create a large and meaningful impact. So I learned a lot from people that have similar characteristics and a similar personality to mine, and have achieved quite a bit. So I typically try to learn from them.
Love it. Yeah, tech is full of introverts who are killing it. That's what I love about tech, that there's a place for everyone, for an extrovert, for an introvert, for someone who juggles between both. 100%. Daniel, thank you so much for being on the show and taking the time. Keep up the amazing work.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the time, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, man. Talk soon.